This podcast is for information purposes only and is not and should not be construed as professional advice or an offer or commitment by any Rabobank group member to enter into a transaction. The views expressed by the presenter and or guests are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Rabobank. Please see the podcast description for our full disclaimer. Welcome to RaboTalk's Growing Our Future, where we talk to experts from both here in New Zealand and across the world to bring New Zealand farmers and growers the information they need to make informed strategic decisions about the future direction of their business to ensure they continue to thrive in a fast-changing world. Through our Catchment Catch-Up series, we've been sharing stories and highlighting the practical, on-the-ground work happening in different catchments across New Zealand. Today we're heading to the Otago region, where a growing number of farmers and communities are quietly getting on with the job, working together to improve their land and water. I'm your host, Blake Holgate, and today I'm joined by Craig Simpson, Regional Manager at the Otago Catchment Community, an organisation that supports and connects catchment groups across Otago. Craig's been involved in this space for a number of years now, both at a governance level and working alongside catchment groups on the ground, so it brings a real practical perspective on how this work comes together. In this conversation, we talk about the role Otago Catchment Community is playing and what Craig sees across the region as more groups form and take action, along with some challenges and opportunities ahead. Craig, welcome to Growing Our Future podcast.
Hi Blake, thanks for having us on.
Looking forward to the conversation. We always like to get the guests to introduce themselves. So would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your career to date, and your current role as Regional Manager at Otago Catchment Community?
Yeah, sure. So I worked, after studying at Polytech, I worked in a water quality laboratory. And after a few years doing that, I went back and did some my master's research in managing water quality through collaborative governance. So it landed me a job at the end of my master's thesis at the New Zealand Land Care Trust. So I became a regional manager there after a bit of time and picked up some projects working with catchment groups specifically. I stayed at New Zealand Land Care Trust for about 6 years, and then always continued working with catchment groups throughout Otago, and I did some work for Otago South River Care, running a 3-year project, and then in the last 2 years I've picked up this role as regional manager for Otago Catchment Community. So I've been around the space with working with catchment groups and managing water quality for quite a few years now.
Yeah. So what drew you to want to work in the catchment context and motivates you to stay there still, Craig?
Yeah, like, as I said, Blake, I did my thesis looking at managing water quality through collaborative governance. So how can we manage this effectively by working together, sort of collaboratively? So I've just actually had quite a lot of interest in that space. And so I think catchment groups is a means by which we can do this. We can have that kind of collective action and identifying sort of collective problems and coming up with local solutions to solve those. So, sort of motivating, lots to learn and sometimes perplexing, but it's, a bit of fun.
Brilliant. Hey, so when we say Otago Catchment Communities, what does that actually mean in practice?
So Otago Catchment Communities, we're an organisation that's set up to support catchment groups throughout Otago. We effectively try and support the groups by providing training, kind of technical support. We'll help the groups set up with their visions and making sure that they've got a current work plan. And so, our success is really the success of the groups. We try and let the groups have a lot of independence. And so we're there kind of as and where we're needed to support them. But, really we're sitting there trying to ensure that they have direction, they know where they're heading, and they've got a current action plan. So, that's something they're working towards.
And how many catchment groups are part of the collective, Craig?
Well, at the moment, we're supporting 28 catchment groups throughout Otago. And like some of those groups, we'll support to varying degrees. Like a group that might be getting started, we'll be having quite a lot of work with them, a lot of facilitated sessions, perhaps, getting them up to scratch on their work plans and whatnot. Whereas other groups that are perhaps larger and been around a bit longer, we might have a bit more limited support to those groups, but still offering training as it arises, training opportunities as they arise, or we do have sort of a funding model as well where we support a lot of the groups each year to in turn pass that funding on to their coordinators or administration.
So if we go right back to the beginning, how did the Otago Catchment Community movement first come about, Craig?
So when I was working for New Zealand Land Care Trust, we had a role to play to support catchment groups through Otago. So not dissimilar to what OCC's working as now. And one of the things that we did there was we convened an annual forum, or it could have been biannual, depending what was the need of the groups. So what we did there was we would gather catchment group leaders from throughout Otago, and we'd kind of bring them together and share ideas, share learnings, just kind of network and see what each other was up to. So that was part of my role through New Zealand Land Care Trust. And after several of years of these forums, some of the groups were starting to say, well, wouldn't it be good to have a bit more support going on, a bit more sort of coordinated structure behind us, just to give us a bit more direction and help us with pull resources and whatnot. And so that was really the beginnings of Otago Catchment Community. We got together with a group of some of the catchment group leaders throughout Otago, representing different geographical areas, and we just came up with a concept that we thought would and could work. And so that's going back a few years now. I believe it was in 2020 or 2021, OCC, or Otago Catchment Community, became an incorporated society. So,
what were some of the sort of conditions or pressures that initially led farmers in Otago and those specific catchment groups to start forming groups across the region? Craig, are there sort of common themes across those groups that you're working with?
I think, to be fair, there's always different drivers for each catchment group, and that's one of the key things that we try and respect as in Otago. Not everyone's on the same page, and not everyone is on the same stage. But I suppose the commonality through Otago is that each of these groups is working towards their own objectives. Certainly early on, there was a number of groups who were looking at water quality. We had quite a big driver from our regional water plan, which required, some specific, it had some specific requirements, regarding thresholds in streams and discharge thresholds that farmers needed to meet. So a lot of the groups actually started forming around because of, to address specifically the water quality requirements through our regional water plan. But that's not all of them. As I say, some were already in existence through for various means. It may have been a water quantity thing at the time, or perhaps a pest problem that led a group to kind of form. And but some of them certainly formed around probably 12 years ago to address the water quality concerns through the regional water plan.
And of those groups that did form back then, Craig, have we seen a positive progress over those 12 years in respect of water quality in those catchments? Are we starting to see some runs on the board for all that hard work that's been done over those years?
Yeah, I think that's always a tricky question to answer, but I think in general there's been a lot of change in land use practices, a lot of more of the implementation of what we'd know as good management practices. I think back 12 years ago or so, a lot of the research that we sort of rely on and have become quite well acquainted with was only just getting completed or perhaps wasn't completed, such as the ag research trials out of Telford, looking at the winter grazing issues. And terms like critical source areas, they were certainly new to me. And now it sort of becomes quite commonplace. I think all that information and the kind of cumulative learning has led to massive changes, and we are seeing in many places improvements to water quality. I would say it really depends on the area of Otago and what the specific issue is. And I know, one of the projects I've been involved in quite heavily in the Pomahaka area, we've been doing work for 12 years or more, and we've sort of left a legacy in the landscape there. Some of the plants and the planting and the wetlands, they're established, they're thriving, but we're talking dozens of years before we'll really see the full impacts of that. So I think we've done some amazing work. There are some benefits, but we'll still see the fullness of those in years to come.
And if you look at a group like the Pomahaka group, which, like you said, been around for 12 years now, is the level of motivation and enthusiasm, engagement as strong now as when it started? Is that just going to be continued to really drive what happens in the landscape in that Pomahaka catchment?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. It's really tricky, right? The drivers have changed. So when I talked earlier about some of the drivers that led to some groups forming, Pomahaka was one that was formed primarily around water quality problems, and the driver was really the regional water plan. That regional water plan now has changed. So, that's led to some different levels of engagement and different drivers than existed probably then. But I think each group sort of evolves as in where they need to evolve. And so groups like Pomahaka, and there's many others besides, have continued to kind of go through different evolutions, different stages of high levels of activity, and then sometimes they're a bit quieter for a period of time. And I think that's actually quite healthy, something to be respected. And I think a really good learning, particularly looking back, when we're talking, 10, 12 or more years, 20 years in some cases, we can start looking back at some of these groups and seeing how they ebb and flow and kind of take a bit of confidence that it's okay, that this happens. That's sort of natural. And as a new driver comes on board, at least those groups are set up and ready to rearing to go to address that driver.
Yeah, so it's actually probably okay that there's not constant high levels of engagement and action happening, because it may be that just leads to burnout. It's hard to sustain that for a long period of time, right? So actually, as you've rightly pointed out, Craig, it's perhaps a healthy part of the cycle is kind of that ebb and flow, pushing, holding back, consolidating, going again.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the important thing is that the group's in existence. It's got its structure. It continues on. active, but perhaps not at the same level of activity as it sort of once was or, can be. But when it's there it's set up, it has its structures, it has its purpose and its plan, and then that driver comes along, they're rearing to go, which I think is just fantastic.
What are some of the biggest or maybe common challenges you've seen catchment groups in the Otago region face over your time you've been involved with them, Craig?
We continue to see struggling with engagement, I think is to be fair to say. Struggling with levels of engagement through different means. Sometimes depending what the driver was initially. If the driver was around the Land and Water Regional Plan and that changes, that can lead to a lot of people just going, "No, was that is that done now? Is that group necessary?" And questioning that. So sometimes people get a bit fatigued. There can be a lot of events and a lot of different groups doing a lot of things, and that can actually feel quite exhausting on people. And so that leads me to the second probably thing that I think this is common throughout all the groups that I've worked with, certainly, is that succession, making sure that there's, how does the group continue on? Is it rely on just one person or a core group of people? And then what's the next stage look like? Because eventually they're going to potentially move from the area. They're potentially going to have a change of circumstance where they can't give so much to that group, whatever it is. And so what does that look like? I think that the challenges that we continue to work on, I would say. I don't know that we've cracked any codes. Wish I had. But yeah, these are realistic things that come up. And good to be aware of, good to learn from other groups and see what's been successful and otherwise, and see if we can reapply in our own local situations.
And do you have any learnings in respect to that succession point? Because I think it's a great one. It's probably one I haven't turned my mind to, but every group and organisation needs to go through an evolution. You've talked a few times. There's often a trigger point or a reason it was formed. You get lots of enthusiasm, action happens. Perhaps that trigger point's resolved, moved on, or isn't as prominent as it was, and you might not have the next generation coming through. So have you learnt anything around how we can, how really help and support the succession of these catchment groups?
Look, I think there's a couple of things that we need to be really clear and careful on. One is, and this comes back to the mandate, I guess, of OCC, Otago Catchment Community, is we want to make sure that each group has their vision and they're clear on that. And it's okay if that changes, right? If their key driver or the trigger points change, that's okay. I think it's really important that each group would have a work plan that's current. And in falling out of that work plan, I think it's important that groups have the people that are on those groups, perhaps in the committee or others who show an interest locally are given roles to do. And that, I don't think that can be burdensome either. But I do think that we all like to be active. The difficulty is often, as you'll be aware, a lot of the people that end up on these committees are the people that are also on this local school board or the rugby club or the whatever else. So we just need to be really careful that it's realistic what we're expecting of them. And so that kind of leads me to my third point on that one, and that's really that coordination support. So an independent coordinator to help drive some of that can actually be really a bit of a game changer for those groups, taking off some of the load, some of the unnecessary things potentially from the farming or catchment group leaders, and ensuring sort of continuity throughout different stages of the evolution of the groups.
Yeah, so really about having good, clear strategy, structure, governance, building the foundations possibly before you get out there and do the on-the-ground actions, which I know we all like to do because that's the bit that's easy to engage with, right? But I suppose from a longevity point of view, get your foundations right, which is probably going to help attract and keep people over a longer period of time.
I think that's entirely right, Blake. And, if you liken it to a planting project, like it's pretty easy to put plants in the ground, well, relatively so. But that maintenance and keeping those plants alive is often that's the slow burn. It's less glamorous. There's definitely less people putting up their hand to come on board and help with that stage of it. But without that maintenance, potentially the planting was never going to be successful. Maybe in some cases a waste of time.
Yeah, so it's actually the follow-up action is if not more important, at least as important as the initial action to start with.
Yep.
All the talks about strategy and governance, but ultimately it is about what happens on the ground. And you've touched on this earlier, Craig, but have you seen a meaningful shift in farmer behaviour and mindset over your time involved with these catchment groups in Otago?
Yeah, I totally have. We've seen massive changes in land use practices. And as I mentioned before, some of the GMP, good management practice stuff that we used to talk about, some of the language wasn't even known or realised. And of course, so we'll fully acknowledge that some people just did it naturally. They knew what to do. But I think we've learned a lot over the last 15 or so years since I've been involved in catchment groups, and the land use change has been astronomical, really. It's been awesome to see, and I guess we're still all on our journey, and we're all learning and realising, I could just tweak this next year potentially, or do this slightly different, and that's healthy and that's good.
So what do you see as the next phase of maturity for the Otago Catchment Community and the groups that make up the community, Craig?
I think we're just going to continue as we are, because of the cycles of funding and just, the existence of the different groups. Everything changes all the time. I wouldn't say we've settled into business as usual or anything of the sort. Things change. We're on short-term funding cycles. But I think, what we're trying to do at Otago Catchment Community is lay some foundations to ensure the success of those groups in the long term. And so I continue to see that as our primary driver. Will things change? I'm not sure, but we'll just roll with it as and when we need to. I think we've got quite good structures in place. We're sort of really important. It's one of our priorities to ensure that we respect and acknowledge the individuality of each group. So we sort of make sure that they've got their own independence. And so we're here to support those groups, and we'll continue to do that.
And if the model succeeds, what could, Otago and the catchments that make it up look like in 10, 20 years' time? Craig, what does good look like to you in the catchment community?
Oh, that's a goodie. That's a doozy, Blake. Look, I think catchment groups achieving their goals, knowing where they're headed, having been in existence for a number of years and being able to look back, just similar to that planting project analogy we talked about, looking back 5 years on, you're so glad you planted that first plant, aren't you? And if you never planted that first plant, then you'll never be able to look back in 5 years and say, hey, look at that. And so I think, we looking forward, I'm hoping that all of those groups have got projects under their hat, that they've been successful, that they've taken their communities on the journey. And I would like to think that, they continue to have their own independence, because we cannot, I think I firmly believe this, we cannot keep continue to, or we cannot treat each catchment group as a carbon copy because they're all different. They have different communities and they have different drivers. So, let's hope that continues. The good work continues in Otago and beyond, of course.
Are there any particular projects that you've been involved in over your time there that you're sort of really proud of, or you want to highlight or talk about, Craig, or multiple projects?
Yeah, I mean, I just think, every project's a good project, right? So, we've been involved in lots of different projects. Primarily, that's when I've been working for the catchment groups. I think, like, OCC's role is more the ensuring that the groups have the direction and sort of more of a strategic role rather than on the ground doing stuff. But certainly been involved in a number of wetland restorations, planting projects in, South Otago particularly, and, wetland, busy creating wetlands all the time. So, I mean, there's some cool things going on. Takes time, takes effort, but, as I was saying before, I think it's really important that we do the work and continue doing our best each day.
What's the one takeaway from, the Otago catchment journey so far that others, whether it's farmers or communities or regions, should really hold on to or you think can learn from?
At the risk of repeating myself, I think it's the independence of each group. I think we just need to really value that, acknowledge it, and set up our structures and the support to enable each group to succeed as they see that they're, that's necessary for them and their communities. I think if we're thinking long term, that's the way we'll be successful. So I think that's what we're trying to do in Otago, and I'd say that's the key learning that I would say, and I think that's how we've been successful.
It's interesting because you could almost mirror that advice with individual farms, couldn't you? It's about individual. There's no carbon copy farm plans or what should or shouldn't be done, and it's about putting the planning and structure in place, and we're just scaling it up to a catchment level. So I think that they're great key messages and takeaways, Craig. Hey, thanks for joining me today and sharing your journey. I've been involved with you on and off for a part of that 12 years, and I know you've worked incredibly hard across different catchments and Otago and done a lot of really good work that's really appreciated by the farmers and communities in the region. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
No worries, Blake. Thanks very much for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to RaboTalk's Growing Our Future podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how Rabobank can support you to succeed into the future, please go to rabobank.co.nz.